Storm Season 2005. As part of our continuing effort to educate our citizens on hurricane preparedness, the Indian River County Emergency Management Division, the Vero Beach High School Television Studio, and Christian FM 91.9 FM welcome you to the 2005 Hurricane Preparedness Program. Now, here's your host, Nathan McCullum.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 2005 Hurricane Preparedness Program. My name is Nathan McCullum, and I'm your Emergency Management Coordinator here in Indian River County. Now, annually we do this program to go over all the items for hurricane preparedness, what everyone needs to do for hurricane preparedness, and kind of give you an overview of the forecast. But we realize that this year is a unique year because after the hurricane season Indian River County had in 2004, we had landfall of not one but two hurricanes here. Both of those hurricanes were the strongest hurricanes that we've ever experienced here in Indian River County. And we know a lot of you are anxious about the upcoming hurricane season. And also you need a little bit more information on what to do because some of us haven't recovered properly yet in order to be ready for the next hurricane season. We are going to cover a lot of topics tonight. We're going to allow you to be calling in with information about or questions that you have about things that may be concerning you about hurricane preparedness this year. But I want you to know that at the end of the program tonight, our efforts don't stop. This is going to be a year-long thing. We are going to be available anytime that you need us to answer your questions about hurricane preparedness and what we can do. Now, before we get started tonight with the call-in program and going over all the hurricane information, I wanted to give you a brief tour of our studio. Over the winter months, a lot of people have called and they wanted information about how do we do all these tropical update programs and how do we get the information out there and just how does the situation work. Well, you are right now in the television studio of the Vero Beach High School, and this is when we do our normal tropical update programs. Now, when you see us when I don't have my tie on and we've been up for 70 hours or so, we're over at the County Administration Building, but about 99% of our programming is done here. What you see here is what we call a blue wall, or what's better known as chroma key, and you're going to see how chroma key works in just a second as we go over the new meteorological data this year for hurricanes. But this wall, when we're doing chroma key, is the wall that we project the pictures on, and of course you'll see me pointing to the pictures and doing all kind of different things, but really this is just a blue wall and the pictures that you see are computer enhanced. Now over on this wall, and actually, if the camera can just kind of zoom around the studio a little bit, what you see is some of the different equipment that are used for different programming that's done here at Vero Beach High School. And of course, we have another set that's set up now for the call-in program that we'll go to later on. But during the hurricane season, we use this entire studio to set up the cameras so that all we have to do is come in a moment's notice and go ahead and start doing our television production, getting you the information. Now, none of this could be done without a control room. And inside the control room right now is Mr. Craig Jerome, and we'll go into the control room right now, and you can see all of the equipment that's in the control room here. This is everything that makes producing the program possible. All of the equipment that you see here, this is our chroma key equipment. This is what you're going to see as it's produced on the television. This is all of our audio equipment. Here's Craig over here running the equipment. All the control room things are all done to make sure that you get a clear picture, to make sure that you are getting all the information that you need during hurricane season. That's kind of a very short tour of our studio, but at least now you have an idea of what we're looking at. So let's go ahead and start the chroma key presentation because you want to know what's going to be occurring during this hurricane season. Now, there's been a lot of discussion this year about, we've heard that there's a lot of hurricanes that are coming. We've heard that there's a lot of things that are going to be coming into our area, that this is going to be another bad hurricane season. Meteorologically speaking, we can expect that the number of storms, hurricanes, tropical storms, tropical depressions, are going to be above average. This is what the NOAA Weather Service has put out as their forecast for the hurricane season. They are expecting that we're going to have 12 to 15 named storms. That means storms that will at least have 40-mile-per-hour winds because that's when tropical storms get their names. Of these 12 to 15, it's possible that 7 to 9 of the tropical storms will become hurricanes, or winds over 74 miles per hour. That's when a system is declared a hurricane. And out of the 7 to 9 hurricanes major hurricanes or hurricanes that have Category 3 or above winds or winds over 111 miles per hour, we are expecting that possibly 3 to 5 of those hurricanes may become major hurricanes. Now, I should emphasize, none of that information means that we are going to be hit here in Florida with a hurricane. These just mean that atmospheric conditions are good in the Atlantic region for an above average number of hurricanes. But it does not mean that any of them are going to make landfall. Now, last year, you remember we were talking about it going to be an above average hurricane season, and most of you during the months of June and July just knew it was hurricane season and that was it. And then in August and September, Florida was hit by 4 hurricanes. Now, nobody in May, June, or July made any forecast or any prediction that Florida was going to be hit by 4 hurricanes. It's just that last year, the steering currents were in such a place that allowed these storms to move in. Now, we're going to talk about the steering currents a lot here in a few minutes, but that's what we have to wait for. We have to wait for the steering currents. We have to make sure that they're in place in the Atlantic before we really can give you any idea of where these storms are going to go. These numbers are just based on systems that will develop in the Atlantic, and they may actually stay out in the Atlantic and not bother anyone. To give you an example in a nutshell of what I'm talking about, out of all the people that have made forecasts this year, nobody has made a forecast that a tropical storm would be developing in the Pacific Ocean, cross Central America, and enter the Western Caribbean in the month of May. Nobody's made that prediction, but that's exactly what's happening with Tropical Storm Adrian. So again, anything can happen during hurricane season. Now, I want to go over some of the factors that go into the hurricane forecast and where these numbers of 12 to 15 named storms come from, or why we may have 7 to 9 hurricanes. There's a lot of things over the winter and the spring months that we're looking at throughout the entire world, not only the Western Hemisphere, the entire world. We look at things like what is the sea surface temperature in the intertropical convergence zone, this area. We are looking to see what the upper level wind shear is over the Atlantic region. We are monitoring to see if the trade winds are favorable for hurricane development or are they hostile trade winds. We are looking to see how many actual low pressure systems are coming off the coast of Africa, because the big storms, the ones that we had last year, Charlie, Francis, Jean, and Ivan, all of those were Cape Verde type storms, or storms that come off the coast of Africa and they actually become a low pressure system, and then they become a tropical storm and eventually a hurricane as they cross the Atlantic Ocean over that warm water. The indicators that we're looking at with all of these ingredients tell us that conditions are very good for hurricane development. But again, I want to emphasize it doesn't tell us where these systems are going to go. On an average hurricane year, let's take last year out of the equation. In an average hurricane year, most of the hurricanes, tropical storms, and tropical depressions remain in the Atlantic Ocean and don't involve any landfall whatsoever. So when we get to the end of June, the beginning of July, we'll have a much better idea on what's going to happen with these systems. Now let's talk about how we are going to broadcast this year, what you need to be looking for, and the information that we're going to provide you. Now this is really no different. We have a couple of new things this year, but I know a lot of you are watching this for the first time, and I want you to get familiar with the satellite images that we're going to show you so that you can clearly understand the steering currents that we're trying to identify. Now this is a satellite picture from earlier today. Now we have Tropical Storm Adrian that's here off Central America, and it's moving northeast, and you can see we're actually starting to get some of the cloud cover here. This system is not going to affect Florida. We may get some scattered rain showers, but it's going to actually merge in with this front that's here and probably just be a storm front like anything else we see. It will definitely go into the Western Caribbean, but it most likely will not sustain itself as a tropical system. But what we're looking at in the Western Hemisphere picture, number one is what's coming off the coast of Africa, or better yet, maybe a system came off a couple days ago. How is it developing? Is it moving across? We also look for large things. Now the picture you're looking at here is an infrared picture. The infrared picture is very good for identifying storms, unsettled weather that's going on in the Western Hemisphere. If we had a hurricane developing now off the coast of Africa, this is a very hostile area right here. It would probably disrupt the system right now to the point it couldn't even become a hurricane. That's why we look at the entire Western Hemisphere. We also want to look at the Pacific Ocean because we try to identify fronts that are developing towards Alaska and Washington, And you're wondering, why would we be concerned about that? Because these fronts that are developing here are going to be along the east coast of the United States in about 7 days. And that may be a steering current if we have a hurricane that's going to be here in 7 days. So in the Emergency Management Office, we continue to watch everything that's going on in the Western Hemisphere so that we can get a better idea of what the steering currents are. Now, every day when I come into work, one of the first things that I look at is this picture right here. This is what's called a sea surface temperature anomaly. And what this does is it gives us an idea in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea, and of course the Atlantic, what's the sea surface temperature? Because the sea surface temperature and the warm sea surface temperature is really the lifeblood of a hurricane. The sea surface temperature must be over 80 degrees in order for a tropical cyclone really to sustain itself. Now you can see this little red area right here, the temperatures are about 85 degrees in the Eastern Pacific Ocean in this area. And what do we have? We have a tropical storm right located in this area. So we know that's conducive. But look at the Gulf of Mexico. Look at the Western Caribbean Sea. These areas are most definitely ready to sustain tropical cyclone activity now, and we're not even June 1st. Now that doesn't mean that anything is going to develop there, because you also need a low pressure system. You need to have calm upper level winds. But one of the 3 or the 4 ingredients for a hurricane is already existing in these areas. For the Atlantic, you can see off the coast of Africa, nothing's going to be developing there yet. And really the intertropical convergence zone still remains too cool for tropical activity. But this sea surface temperature map will change over the next 30 to 45 days as the surface temperatures start to increase, and we of course will be bringing that to you. Now we will also be providing you an infrared picture of the continent of Africa, because we want to be able to identify the low pressure systems that are coming off the continent of Africa as they exit, so nobody is surprised by anything that's coming off the coast. We want you to see them as they make their way across. We'll actually be able to identify, is there a counterclockwise spin with some of these systems, and that'll tell us that we'll probably get a depression or so, a depression or maybe even a storm as these exit the west coast of Africa, moving towards the United States. Now, the pictures that you're always most interested in are the infrared and the water vapor pictures. So let's start with the infrared, the close-up infrared now. Now, this is what we call the colorized infrared picture. This is really using the same technology that you just saw in the black and white pictures, but we colorized this to kind of show the clouds a little bit better. Now, this is actually some of the outflow coming from Tropical Storm Adrian, and you can see it's starting to brush South Florida. There's no wind involved with this and maybe some scattered showers, but the tropical system, a hurricane or a tropical storm, is a very large system. And you can see this is about 1,200 miles away from where that actual center of circulation is located, and we're having some of the outflow even start moving across Florida. This will just be in the form of scattered showers. Now here's that other system we were looking at before on the Western Hemisphere picture. So we take a close-up, and we can see with the colorized infrared that this is a very hostile area in the atmosphere right now, so hostile that any kind of tropical activity coming off the coast of Africa would not be able to make it. That would definitely disrupt the circulation. So that's something that we're looking for, so as we make our forecast, we can say, well, it really doesn't have too much of a chance, or if that's not there, then it may be a better breeding ground for hurricane activity. Now, this is a picture that really everybody, if you've been watching us over the years, you know that we use the water vapor more than anything else, because the water vapor shows the steering currents very clearly. You don't even really need me to talk. You'll see the steering currents very clearly. Now, I should tell you, by the time that we start doing the routine tropical updates, we are going to have what's called a telestrator. If you watch football during the football games, there'll be somebody on there drawing the X's and O's, and we're going to have that technology beginning in July. And when the steering currents are hard to see, we're going to actually be able to draw them on here, and we'll be able to show you a little more distinctly where those steering currents are located, so you know what we're looking at and have a better understanding of why we think the hurricane's going to turn, or it's not going to turn, it's going to continue to move in one direction. If we had a hurricane coming today, and I know those of you that have watched us over the years, you probably know what would happen right now, but if you haven't seen these pictures before, the water vapor today is telling us that we have a very strong southwest and northeast jet stream here. And wherever you see a dark area, such as this area here or the area here. This is a very dry, high-pressure area. That means that is a hostile environment for hurricanes because hurricanes want a moist area. They want to stay right around in here, but this would have severe upper-level shear, and this would be dry air. It wouldn't want to go there. If we had a system developing today and it was coming straight towards the United States, most likely it wouldn't even make it. It would go through Cuba and stay in this direction because it would want to stay south of all that hostile activity. But that's just one way that we can use the water vapor picture to better illustrate the steering currents and let you understand why we think it's going to move. Now, this is the same picture, but it's a colorized water vapor. And we use the colorized water vapor a lot of times to show wind shear because the color water vapor shows the sharpness of the clouds a lot better than the black and white picture. Now, this is the water vapor, and here's that strong trough that we were talking about before. But look at the fanning here of the clouds that are just to the south of this. That is wind shear. See how they're very sharp and they curve right on down here. That means that the upper level winds are very hostile. That means that no tropical cyclone could survive going through this right now because the upper level winds would just shear the thunderstorm activity apart. Now, this is not going to stay like this all year. I wish I could tell you it was, but this is just an example of how we use that satellite imagery to follow the steering currents and follow the hurricanes. And as these develop throughout the 2005 hurricane season, we'll talk a lot more about it, but at least now you know the information that we're going to be looking at. Now, once we use the satellite pictures and we know there's a tropical system that's developed out there, we need to know more information as that system approaches the United States. And we get that information using airplanes. This is a picture of one of the P-3 Orions that is used to fly into the hurricane. This is a NOAA aircraft, and it flies into the hurricane and drops those drop sounds and goes through the eye of the hurricane to investigate the storm, get us the most accurate data. That data is transmitted back to the Hurricane Center, to our office, many other agencies, and then it's put into the modeling system so that we can come up with a forecast based on the accurate data. You're going to hear two terms this year during hurricane season. You're going to hear the estimated data. We'll be talking about estimated pressure is this or estimated wind speed is this. That means that we're getting the information solely from satellite. But when you start hearing a plane's been in the system and winds are clocked at 120 miles an hour, that is very good, very accurate data, and it's because of planes like this. Now, we also use the Air Force reconnaissance planes, the C-130s, and these planes are used by the Air Force Reserve to also fly into the storms. Now, the NOAA aircraft that I just showed you previously does a lot of scientific research and experiments. This is strictly a data collector. This plane goes out, it's built like a tank to be able to go through these eye walls and at 200 miles an hour and gather that data. Now, I have to tell you that this is not a pleasant ride. This is not like a ride on a jet aircraft. The pilots, the scientists that are on these airplanes are bouncing around that airplane until they break through that eye wall. It's a dangerous job, and it's a very hard job, but these people love it. They wouldn't trade it for the world. And these are some of the people that are the true heroes in hurricane forecasting, because if these planes didn't go out there, a lot of what we do is based on estimates and not based on true fact. Now, this is what it looks like once the airplanes pierce the eye of a hurricane. And these are really phenomenal and unique pictures. But this is through the eye of Hurricane Francis. Remember Hurricane Francis, before it made landfall here, it made landfall with winds of 105 miles per hour. But before it made landfall, it was a Category 4 hurricane. It had winds of 145 miles per hour. And this is a picture of the plane as it went through the system with 145 mile an hour winds. And you can see inside the eye here, it's very calm. There's no wind. It's just because all the energy is around the eye wall. And we have a picture of that in just a second. But this kind of gives you a better picture of what the pilot and the people of the airplane see when they're in the eye of the storm. Here is the eye wall. Here is the actual eye itself. It's almost, it looks like you could get out and walk on this. It looks solid, but that's because all of the energy is stationed in this eye wall here. That's where the tremendous winds are located. But this area right here is very calm, and you can see the eye allows clear skies, and that's what the pilots are seeing. It has very clear skies because, again, all of that energy is wrapped around the eye. Now this is the eye wall. This is actually the eye wall of Hurricane Mitch that we had back in 1999 in the Caribbean. It never affected the United States. But again, you can see, look at the sun coming through. This is right in the middle of the hurricane. The winds when this plane went into the system, 170 miles an hour sustained. And you can see in the eye, it's still very calm. Now this is what's called a stadium effect eye wall. And we're going to be talking more about this when we have systems developed this year on the satellite. The stadium effect indicates that a storm is very strong, and it also indicates that the storm is intensifying. The reason it is called a stadium effect is because if you took a picture of the storm from outer space and you looked into the eye, it'll look just like a football stadium or baseball stadium, very large at the top, and then it narrows down as it gets closer to the eye. And this is what it looks like. But you can see, while this may look pretty, it is not pretty when you're flying a plane through the eye wall, because they have to fly through the strongest winds of this hurricane before they reach the calm. Now, after the investigation is done by the C-130s and the P-3 Orions, the propeller aircraft, then the Gulfstream goes out. This is the NOAA Gulfstream, what we call the jet aircraft. Now, the jet aircraft does not go anywhere near the hurricane. What the purpose of this aircraft is, it flies hundreds of miles ahead of the hurricane, taking data from the atmosphere, dropping drop sounds, but collecting data ahead of the hurricane, flying at high speed so that it can collect that data in a timely manner. That data is in turn fed back into the models so that the models have good, accurate data on pressure areas, barometric pressure, temperature, sea surface temperature, which in turn aids the models in making their model runs. Now, if you've seen us before, you know that many times we've seen the forecast, and I'll make the statement, this forecast may change because the jet aircraft is going out tonight to do an investigation. And sure enough, the next day when the model runs go, the forecast may change 400 miles from what it was before, because we have accurate data rather than estimated data with the jet aircraft. Now, here's an example of how the jet aircraft flies around. These are all data points that were collected for the storms as they came through. This is just one particular storm. This is actually during Hurricane Ivan when it was coming into the Panhandle. These are collection points for the data so that we know, and I can identify through satellite when we get certain data and we're able to recognize it at that point. But you can see how far it went away from where the storm was making landfall, because it needed to know what's going to happen in 2 or 3 days when the eye made it to that point. This is a close-up picture, the same close-up picture, and you can see here are all the data points that were coming through the aircraft. We monitor these, and then if we click onto these with our computer, it comes up with a huge amount of data that we're able to look at that tells us a little bit more about what we should be forecasting. Now, we take that aircraft information, we take the satellite information, we take the buoy data that's coming from the buoys in the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, we take the model runs. Now we've got to develop a forecast, and this is a forecast. This happens to be the latter forecast for Hurricane Francis. This is the track that Hurricane Francis made when it made landfall in Indian River County, but this is the forecast once it went through Indian River County. And you know, there's been a lot of talk about the Bermuda high pressure system and what the Bermuda high pressure system does. And that high pressure system sits out here in the Atlantic Ocean near Bermuda. That's why it has that name. But a lot of people are concerned about the Bermuda high pressure. The Bermuda high pressure, believe it or not, tends to steer storms away from Florida. Last year, it just became abnormally large, and it has never expanded as far as it did. And because it did that, it steered the storms into Florida. But if you follow the track of Hurricane Francis, and all the other storms did this, we just didn't see it because we didn't have power, it stayed right in that circle, right where the circulation of the Bermuda high pressure was. So they were following the high pressure, it's just that it expanded too much. Normally we would see that it make a turn right about Puerto Rico here and stay off the coast and go this way. Again, we won't know if that's going to occur until the end of June, maybe the beginning of July, when the steering currents stabilize in the Atlantic Ocean. But this is the error cone, the big yellow thing that you see here, because obviously we're never exact, but this is the forecast map that you'll be seeing as we develop these forecasts as far as the hurricane activity in the Atlantic and, of course, in the Gulf and the Caribbean. Now, of course, we will also be putting what we call our watch and warning legend up. This is just an example of where a warning area may be. You'll see that in the colorized versions, breaking it down into watch warnings, tropical storm watch warnings. We'll have that all illustrated here for you, so it'll be real easy to figure out where the watches and the warnings are going. Something that we used last year that was a little new, we perfected it this year, was our wind field. This really helped out to understand how much wind we were going to receive in Indian River County. Where you see the green, and this is a hurricane from 1998, I believe, but where you see the green is where the forecast projection for winds of at least 50 miles an hour were going to occur, and that was in the green area. Where you see the pink is where hurricane force winds were going to be expected, and where you see the black is where hurricane force winds over 100 miles per hour were expected. Now this is a forecast, and remember I said this is from 1998. We didn't have any hurricane make landfall here in 1998. That's because the system actually went out to sea and didn't bother anybody. But this is just an example of the wind field, and we'll have a legend on here that tells you about the wind field and what it's going to do. But we'll go over these again when we have a system develop and kind of go over all the technology. I just want to make you familiar with it now so that you know what we're going to have available to advise you on when these systems develop. Now, one thing that really concerns me is things like this. It says, wake me on November 30th, or I'll get out of the tub November 30th. Now, I know that comic relief is a good thing at this point, but folks, I know everybody's anxious about hurricane season. I know that you're hearing all kind of things on television about it's going to be a bad year, Florida's going to get hit again. We just don't know that. And remember, it took 200 years for us to have the 2 hurricanes that we had last year. It may be another 200 years, or it could be next year that we see our next hurricane. The meaning of that is simple. If you live on the east coast of the United States or you live along the Gulf of Mexico, you have to be prepared for the possibility that we may have a landfalling hurricane at any time. And that's the reason that we're here tonight, to answer the questions, to help you get ready for hurricanes this year. Hopefully we're not going to have any hurricanes, but it's really imperative that we all prepare, because we know what the problems are now, and we need to make sure that we have those supplies on hand. So we're going to take a real quick break here, about 30 seconds or so. I'm going to go into the studio where the phones are, and let's get started with answering your questions about the 2005 hurricane season. Well, we're back in the other studio now. We made it over here, and we're ready to start taking a lot of your questions, and I'm happy to say that we've already received a lot of the questions. Before we get started on our actual hurricane preparedness discussion, let me introduce the people that are here with me tonight that are going to help us out in getting all the answers out there, trying to give you some better direction on what we need to do for hurricane preparedness this year. First is my partner in emergency management, Etta Lopresti. Etta has been in emergency management for many years. She's the emergency management planner here in Indian River County. And Etta is actually the person who ran the Emergency Operations Center for both hurricanes, as we brought in all the agencies in our center to go ahead and make sure that we were recovering the county in an expedient manner and in a timely manner, so that obviously we could get the county back up and operating. Now, next to Etta is Patty Vasquez, who is the Public Information Officer for the school district, and Patty was an essential aid to me and a lot of other people in getting the information out to the public. And Patty's going to cover a lot of the school questions that we have tonight. And we also have Bruce Douglas from Christian FM 91.9 or WSCF. As all of you know, we are simulcasting this television program on Christian FM tonight. So before we get started, for those of you listening on the radio, let me give you the phone number that you need to call. And if you have any questions, the questions are going to come over to me on this computer that's in front of me, so you won't be live on the air, because we don't want to intimidate you and have you nervous on television. So we're going to have the questions right here on the computer. But the number that you want to call, even if you're local here, is 800-780-3692. Even if you're local, you'll call that number, 800-780-3692. And for those of you watching on cable, we should let you know that on the radio broadcast, this broadcast is going from Brevard County all the way south to Martin County. So we are covering a lot of people, and I think the answers are going to be pretty much the same for everybody in our listening area. And you can call that number anytime tonight with any questions that you may have. Also, I want to make you aware of a email address that you can use if you want to just go ahead and email a question, and that is storm, S-T-O-R-M, @christianfm.com. You can send an email there anytime between now and 8 o'clock tonight, and we'll get your question on the air, and we'll make sure that we answer those questions for you. Now, we've already had an interesting question come in that I have heard just about every day going around the public, and I know it's probably on everyone's mind right now, and everybody wants to know, are we going to get hit by 2 hurricanes again this year? And I have to tell you that you've probably heard a lot of things on news programs. You've heard a lot of things that are occurring throughout the world right now, but as I mentioned in the earlier piece, there's no data right now for the steering currents that are going to be here in July and August and September. And because of that, it's impossible to say if Florida, or for that matter, anywhere in the United States, is actually going to be threatened by hurricanes. Remember, hurricanes are an essential part of the ecological system of the ocean. Mother Nature made hurricanes to vent the ocean of the warm sea surface temperatures, and in any given year we have many hurricanes that are in the Atlantic Ocean, but they stay out in the ocean. They never threaten us, and so you hear very little about them. So don't get wrapped up in the numbers that are being used in the forecast. We know it's going to be an above average year. We know the atmospheric conditions suggest that, but nobody knows the steering currents yet. We won't know that for at least another month. So please don't think that any storm that develops is actually going to come in and make landfall in Florida. I'm not saying that won't happen, but we'll definitely keep you informed, and nobody's going to be surprised if we have any hurricanes coming anywhere in the United States. Now, as we go through the evening tonight, we're going to cover questions or topics that we know are essential to what you need to know in the questions that we had before. We're also going to cover the questions that are coming in live, but we want to cover as many topics tonight as we can so that we can get to the things that you're concerned about. There are going to be some questions tonight that we can't answer, such as maybe there's FEMA questions. That is something that you'll have to talk to FEMA agencies about, because we don't have any control over the FEMA agencies. But I can tell you that if we have another hurricane, there will be another declaration, and the same FEMA resources that you had before would be available again. So we have another question that came in that I think is a very interesting question, and it deals with a tile roof, and there's numerous leaks on the tile roof, and the person that sent the email is suggesting that they don't have any way to put a blue tarp on the tile roof, probably because of the wind conditions, that the tarp may not be able to settle on a flat piece. The easiest thing to do with that, and we recognize that there's a lot of people out there right now that are still having problems getting roofers because it just takes a while. The easiest way is to identify where the leak is in the roof and remove that section of tile. Just remove it from the roof and cover the flat portion under the tile with the blue tarp. And you're going to have the blue tarp there for a while until your roof is repaired, but at least that way you've stopped the leaks and you're preventing the water from getting in. And these are the types of questions that actually that's why we're here tonight, to cover a lot of these things. Now I want to turn it over to Etta Lopresti here for a second, because Etta, one of her job duties in our office and one of the most important things that she does in our office is she is in charge of the continuing update of what we call our Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, or CEMP. Now for those of you out there in the public, you probably could care less what the name of our plans are, but I want Etta to give us an overview of how that plan actually works and why we have that plan, so that you understand when the hurricane's over, and actually during the hurricane, what is going on here in the county and what resources are being deployed to help recover you from the hurricane. Etta, can you give us a brief description on that?
Sure. That plan is going to help us so that when we are declared an emergency area, it's going to tell us how we're going to run our business during an emergency. What's going to happen when we do declare an emergency, what steps that we're going to take, and what actions that we're going to follow. And there's one other thing that I wanted to add. Earlier you were talking about what kind of questions that people ask during hurricane season. And I wanted to say, when I go out and I do hurricane preparedness talks, one of the most frequently asked questions is, what kind of a hurricane season are we going to have? And I know that you and I share on this one, that we don't want anything to happen to any of our neighbors on either coast, but it doesn't matter where that hurricane's going to hit. If it doesn't hit in Vero Beach, then we've had a good season.
And that's a very good point. You know, in the history of hurricanes, and we've talked about this many times before, in 1992, from a meteorological standpoint, it was a very quiet hurricane season. We only had one hurricane that year. But from a human standpoint, it was the worst natural disaster at that time that we had ever had, because that's the year Hurricane Andrew made landfall in Miami. So from a meteorological aspect, that was a very quiet year. We didn't have 18 or 19 named storms, but yet Miami still recovers from a lot of the effects from Hurricane Andrew, and that was 13 years ago. So it only takes one to make landfall, and that is exactly correct. If it hits here, it's a bad year. If it doesn't hit here, we did okay. So please keep that in mind as you're doing your planning. Make sure that you understand that the numbers really don't matter. It's if it makes landfall here or not. One of the questions that we've had come in is, if you don't know where the hurricane is going, how can you make a family plan? And Etta and I work on this constantly when we're telling people a family plan is not something that you just do for hurricanes. You should have that ready. And Etta, you may want to talk a little bit about what are the things that people should include in a family plan for hurricanes or really any type of emergency or disaster situation.
That's right. Another thing that I wanted to talk about are some of the lessons that we've learned during this past hurricane season in 2004. And I think one of the most valuable lessons that we learned is that the apathy towards hurricane preparedness in Florida is going to fall. That I think that people are going to take hurricane preparedness a lot more seriously, and that our job is going to be a lot easier, and that I think people are going to take us seriously now when we tell them that they need to prepare for not only hurricane season but all the other disasters that we need to prepare for. And I think especially now that we have the weather occurrence going on in the Pacific, that people are going to go out to the stores and start getting their batteries and their water and their portable radios and know that they need to get these things in advance. And I think that we're not going to see the lines at the 11th hour like we did last year. And I think people are going to be ready this time. And they know that they need to get that water so that they're not there in the lines for the food and the water and the ice like they were before. And they're going to see how important that is. And when we say that you may be without power for up to 2 weeks at a time, I think that they're going to take us seriously this time.
Absolutely. And you bring up an excellent point about for years we've been trying to educate the public on exactly what needs to be done for hurricane preparedness, but unfortunately personal experience is usually the best teacher. Now you know what your needs are if you were without power for 5 or 7 days and you need water and food, that type of thing. And as Etta said, now is the time to go out and get those supplies. Don't wait till the hurricane watch is issued, because the stores may not have enough supplies, because everybody seems to wait to the last minute. We really need them to go out and do that now.
I think it's been a long time since we've had that apathy on our side. It's been since 1992 with Hurricane Andrew, and unfortunately that only lasted for a couple years. So we have that on our side now, but not for very long.
One of the things that everybody was anxious about when the 2 hurricanes came through, after we were getting recovery and things started to seem to be coming together a little bit, the first question everybody said was, when is school going to open? And when are the kids going to go back to school? And Patty, I wonder if you could take a few minutes to explain to the public what exactly is going on with the school district after a hurricane and evaluating the schools, and how do they make the decision it's time to open up the school?
Okay, Nate. Well, you know, there are a lot of factors that go into determining how soon the schools can be opened up. Our superintendent met with you and emergency management folks and a host of other agencies and our own people continuously during or right after the hurricanes to determine just how soon we could get our kids back in school. And, you know, first of all, our schools serve as shelters, some of them, many of them. And so we have to make sure that the folks that are sheltered there after the storm, you know, can have a place to go to after we close the shelters. And then we have to go in and sanitize and clean the schools to get them prepared, you know, for our students. But before we do that even, we have to make a damage assessment. And Superintendent Marr and our maintenance people did a phenomenal job last year of going in immediately after the storms, both storms, hurricanes, and making those damage assessments and getting our schools back into the condition where they were acceptable to receive our students and our staff. So, you know, you've got the shelter issue. You've got the damage issue. Then, you know, we had the issue of power. Power was certainly a huge issue for us, and we worked very closely with FP&L and Vero Beach to get that power restored. And once we got power restored to all our schools, usually then it was time to bring our students back. And I know it was a priority with you. It was a priority with our superintendent. We knew it was a priority for our community to get our kids back in school to help establish normalcy again in our community. And so we did the best that we could, and we'll continue to do that, of course, dealing with all those different factors that I mentioned.
And we were talking before the program tonight about how important it was to get the schools back online, to offer that normalcy, especially to the children.
Oh, yeah.
The first couple of days, the children were saying, oh, this is fun, no school, we're all having a good time. And then they recognized that they weren't seeing their friends, they weren't doing their normal duties, and they were getting depressed along with the adults. And as far as our mental recovery, I think it's really important that we get those schools up and operating to show that we're getting back to normal, that we haven't lost everything. And I have to compliment the school district. They did an excellent job on getting all of that done and providing exactly what the students and the families needed during both the actual hurricane and getting the schools back online. One of the questions that's coming in tonight is relating to ocean and currents, that we're having the strong winds along the East Coast over the last couple of days, and it's breezy. And does that have anything to do with the steering currents? And right now, that really doesn't have anything to do with the steering currents for hurricanes. That's just because of pressure systems that are located offshore, but they're not permanent pressure systems. They are just temporary pressure systems that are continuing to move. The big pressure system that we're looking for is what everybody knows now is the Bermuda high pressure system, which will definitely settle in its place by the end of June. But what we have right now really is not indicative of anything that's going on with the steering currents for the hurricane season. As I said, those really won't happen until the end of June or the beginning of July. Bruce, I want to talk a little bit about the Christian FM station 91.9, the work that you all do with the county and getting the emergency information out. And if you would, take a few moments to kind of explain to our public what exactly happened to your studio during the hurricanes, because I don't think they really appreciate the hard work that you all did.
Well, thanks, Nathan. Thanks for having us on. A few years back, Christian FM 91.9 FM signed an agreement with Indian River County whereby we would become the official emergency information station for the county. And of course, that came into play quite frequently last year, unfortunately. And what this means is that we dedicate our airwaves to Indian River County emergency officials when they deem it necessary to speak directly to the public, and that happened numerous times in September. And what's great about this is that it allows the public to receive the information directly from Indian River County officials. It's not being filtered through any other media sources. Thereby, if they want to hear it straight from Nathan McCollum, they're going to hear it straight from Nathan McCollum and get the latest information. Another reason this is great is listeners and viewers don't have to wade through a lot of West Palm Beach information to wait and get to the information that's important to Indian River County residents. It's coming directly from Indian River County officials. What I thought was great last year, Nathan, is during the dicier times of weather, you came into the studio and sat in and took phone calls, much like we're doing tonight, answering people's concerns. And I know we're going to plan to do a lot more of that if we need to in the coming seasons. From a technical perspective, Christian FM 91.9 FM has set up a number of redundant communication systems with Indian River County officials. Thereby, if the storm should knock out one particular system, we'll still be able to get the flow of information coming and going through Indian River County officials to the public. Also, we got a lot of comments last year. I know Indian River County has a great website for providing emergency information. Christian FM also streams live audio at christianfm.com. And we heard from a number of people who evacuated the area, went to Ohio or Georgia, and were able to get online and follow the broadcast of what was happening back in Indian River County to determine what was happening in their neighborhood. So it was a pleasure to provide that service. You mentioned what was it like during the hurricane. Our studios were hit pretty hard, took on some water, especially during the first hurricane. And we were scrambling around trying to keep the equipment from being damaged, but we did what we had to do. Fortunately, we have a very good tower site west of Vero Beach, west of 66th Avenue, Thereby, it gets the tower a little bit further away from the coastline, and it's rated to take a pretty good amount of wind. So from a technical perspective, things went fairly well during the last 2 hurricanes, and we're hoping it's going to continue to do so.
Well, I can tell you, and I don't think the public can really appreciate the work that you all did unless they walked into your studio. And if you haven't been in a radio studio, basically the floor is made out of electrical wires and cables and that kind of thing. And we went over there after Hurricane Francis. There was about, I want to say, at least 6 inches of water on that floor. Easily, anybody could have been electrocuted or hurt because of that. And the people at your studio that didn't faze them. They had a priority to keep that station online, and you all did an excellent job in doing that.
Thank you.
And I want to remind everyone that if you're listening on radio, again, the 800 number to call if you have any questions is 800-780-3692. And that's true if you're local or if you're out of county, you would call that same number, 800-780-3692. And if you prefer to send us a question through email, it's storm@christianfm.com. Etta, we received a question from one of the viewers that simply says, I'm disabled, I don't have a vehicle, I can't get around. If I'm supposed to evacuate, where do I go and how do I get there? How do I get assistance to take me to a shelter?
Nathan, we have a couple of programs through the Emergency Management Office to help our citizens in Indian River County. One of those programs is the Special Needs Program. We have a special needs shelter that's at the Sebastian River High School, and that is for people who need assistance with their day-to-day living with certain medical conditions, and they would have to pre-register for that program through our office. And all of their applications are reviewed by medical professionals to determine if they meet the criteria or not. And then in that program, they would either receive transportation from our office or they can transport themselves. The second part of that program is for individuals such as the person who wrote in, that if they are unable to transport themselves to a regular shelter, we can arrange to provide transportation for them. But in order for us to know about those individuals, they must pre-apply, pre-register for the program as well. And that's a service that we're very happy to provide because otherwise those individuals would be stuck at home. So we're glad to do that. But we need to encourage those people to please pre-register with us as soon as possible. And you can do that by phoning our office at 567-8000, extension 1444.
And also the information on the things that Etta just explained are on our website too, and you can look at that information on there. But we want to emphasize, please call now. Don't wait till the hurricane watch or warning again.
That's correct. And the second part of her question was, what kind of items do I bring with me? There's a whole set of items that you would bring to a special needs shelter, and that would be part of the packet that she would receive if she were accepted for that program. But as far as going to a regular shelter, that individual would bring any type of food, water, medications, a blanket, pillow, change of clothes, sleeping bag, perhaps a chase lounge, and those types of items. Maybe some cards, a book to read, and what have you.
Okay, we have an interesting question that is one I have to tell you I thought I would never see here tonight, but it is kind of interesting, and that is, what is the shelf life of an unopened MRE? And I have to tell you that the MRE, of course, is the acronym for Meals Ready to Eat. Those are the things that you receive. I have to tell you that the shelf life of an MRE is forever, as the military tells us. There is no true expiration date. I would say probably after 5 years, I really wouldn't want to open it up. But there is no expiration date on there. The military tells us that they're vacuum packed, and that's why they don't put an expiration date on there. But I have to say, and I heard this from a lot of people that were in the military years ago, when they had the different type of MRE, which were canned sardines or something like that. And from what I understand, these were quite tasteful, and they did okay. But I wouldn't keep it anywhere past 5 years. We did have a question that came through that is something that has involved a lot of people, and we're going to try and cover it here. Let me read it. Last season, so many families renting homes had to leave their homes because of damage and rental prices have subsequently skyrocketed. If we get hit again, the prices continue to climb, and will there be any help for those families, or will the city use controls to keep the rental prices from becoming completely unaffordable for those families? And I have to tell you that this has been a concern of ours even after just Hurricane Francis, and then when Hurricane Jeanne came around, it was a big issue because we were right on the verge of taking care of all the temporary housing after Hurricane Francis, and then when Hurricane Jeanne came, it destroyed what we needed, and that's when the FEMA trailers came in. Now, we have the ability to put in a temporary trailer park or something like that. That can be done through FEMA, or it can be done through the county or even a municipality. But the problem with that is we take you away from your home that's been damaged. Even if you're renting a home, we take you away from that rental property. And that's why the solution was to put these travel trailers in an area that you could get to your residence before the hurricane so that you can complete the repairs. As far as price controls go, we don't know of any legal authority that gives anyone the authority to dictate price controls for rental properties. But I can tell you that there is a lot of new legislation that is going through the House of Representatives right now and will be going through the U.S. Senate later this year, dealing with disaster relief and procedures for FEMA, and this may very well be one of the items that's included in that because it's been such a big issue throughout the state of Florida, and it's always an issue no matter where a hurricane, an earthquake, a tornado, anything occurs, because your housing is gone, and the federal government is working on that right now, but I don't have an answer as to when we will actually get a good solid answer on when that's going to occur. Etta, one of the other things that we were notified a little while ago, and I think everybody's well aware of now, there's a chance for some sales tax savings out there as people prepare for hurricane season. And I know you've got information on that. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what that is?
That's correct. A tax bill was just passed recently, and that's where we're going to have some tax relief on some hurricane supplies. So now is the perfect opportunity for families to go ahead and stock up on their hurricane supplies. Certain items are going to be tax exempt. The dates are going to be June 1st through June 12th, and it's going to be for flashlights, batteries, portable radios, first aid kits, generators up to the amount of $750, just several hurricane supply items. I can't remember any of the other ones.
There's numerous, and I think there's little poster boards at some of the stores that are selling these, giving you the amounts and the sales tax savings.
But there are numerous hurricane supply items, and now's the time to stock up on those items. Perfect time to work on your disaster supplies kits.
Absolutely, and we, as you know, along with this program, there's a lot of things that are going on over the next 2 or 3 weeks to prepare everyone for hurricane season, because the season does start June 1st. And it runs through November 30th. And Patty, your program, Notebook, is doing a lot of things right now, not only for the general public, but for the school system and the students in the system, educating them on hurricanes and what may or may not be occurring. And maybe you can let everybody know about the Notebook program and what they can see over the next few weeks.
Sure. Notebook is a program that we tape here at Vero Beach High School. It runs continuously pretty much throughout the weekend on the Education Channel. And Nate and I today, in fact, just did a show on this hurricane season, and we will continue to talk about how we will keep our children safe in school, not only during hurricanes, but a tornado event or any other kind of natural disaster. We think that education is the key and communication is the key. So we try to highlight these kinds of things on Notebook, and in fact this weekend tune in and you'll see Nathan and I talking about this hurricane season and the relationship between the school district and the county and how we work together during the hurricane season and that sort of thing. So we appreciate the opportunity to do it here at the high school with our students and with you, Nathan, and the emergency management team with the county.
And that's a great thing, because a lot of your school families and the students are very familiar with your Notebook program.
That's
There's
right.
probably a lot of people in the county. And this is just another means to get the information out.
Sure.
And we all recognize that this is an anxious period, even though we don't know what this hurricane season may bring. I know a lot of you are out there right now and you are concerned. The first storm that looks like it's going to get anywhere close to the United States a lot of you are going to come up with the opinion, I can't go through this anymore. It doesn't mean that it's coming here, but if a hurricane does approach us, we're going to be keeping you involved in the loop and letting you know the information that's going to occur so that you have accurate information. Patty's program, Notebook, does a very good job of doing that with the students. And then, of course, Bruce at Christian FM, you're constantly, not just this week, but throughout hurricane season, your station is providing a lot of information about hurricane preparedness, what's going on in weather in general. You know, during hurricane season, we just don't have hurricanes. We have bad thunderstorms and a lot of other things. And I think it's important that the public understand all the different means of information they can get from your station. That's right. On a daily basis, we talk about weather updates and any other type of emergency information folks need to know about, as do other media sources in the community. It just so happens that we have that agreement with Indian River County that we came to a few years ago, where we are the official information station for the county. Should there be a time of emergency or hurricane watch or warning, that's when you'll start getting that direct information. And last year during Francis and Jean, we broadcast live in their entirety those daily briefings that many of the agencies were involved with from the EOC in Indian River County, and that included not just Indian River County, but FEMA, the utilities, the school district, the sheriff's department. So I guess you could kind of call it the C-SPAN of emergency management because it's an unfiltered source of information for you from Indian River County and other agencies. And I think one of the things that, and I'll give you all a couple minutes, I'll give you like a 2-minute warning here of what I'm going to ask you, because they didn't know I'm going to ask them this question, and I purposely didn't want them to know because I want you all to hear it from the heart. But I'm going to ask them in a few minutes. Each of these people, including myself, have gone through both hurricanes. We spent long hours. We did everything that we could to help the public. But I want to hear personally what they went through during the hurricane, what they remember about the hurricane, and whether it's a good or bad memory, what stands in their mind as something that they'll never forget about the hurricanes. Because I think that's important, because sometimes the first responders, the government workers are viewed in this nothing affects them type of view, but we were victims also, along with the hundreds and hundreds of school board employees, county employees, municipal employees that went out and worked. And we knew our jobs, and all of those employees did a very good job. But we became victims too, and after everything calmed down and the holidays came around, I know Etta and I had time to reflect on some of the things that happened, and we learned that probably sometime after 4 or 5 days we need to take a nap. But there's a lot of things that we went over and we kind of reflected on. And Etta, I'll start with you. Your family had to evacuate. You were a victim. Your home was damaged. How did that affect you and how you were doing your job duties?
Well, the first thing I thought about was the duty at hand and the work that I had to do, and it didn't affect me right away. And like you, I was up many hours and performed lots of work duties, and after many sleepless nights, then it started to worry me, and I have to admire my husband because he evacuated the area and left the area with 2 kids and mother-in-law and 2 birds, 2 cats, and
Noah's Ark there, I don't know.
Yeah, without a complaint. And I have a very ill father that's in a nursing home that had to be evacuated, and that was disconcerting, and a dog at the Humane Society, and lots of concerns, but we made it through.
And your situation was really no different than a lot of people here. We have to plan ourselves and make sure that we have everything planned. Maybe a little easier for us because that's our jobs, but we most definitely have to plan for ourselves also. Patty, what do you remember about 2004?
My goodness, I just, like Etta, as a mother, I remember being concerned about my own children who had evacuated with their father, and I worked pretty much through both storms, and I knew what I had to do. And I just remember going back to my house afterwards, and thankfully my house was spared. My property was pretty heavily damaged as far as trees and that kind of thing, which, that's not a big deal considering when you looked around and saw what other people went through. But I remember having no power and no water And I remember complaining to you, Nathan, about that. And I was sitting next to FPL and all the conferences, and thinking, man, maybe I should say something. But anyway, you know, and then having to go in and do the 10 o'clock briefing, and then go home and try and clean up and no shower and go back for that 4 o'clock briefing. I remember that vividly, you know, and that was a little hairy, but you know, you just know what you got to do, and getting the information out to the public, especially many of our employees had evacuated the state. So I was not only on at the briefings at 10 and 4 every day, but then I had to go back to my office and do the press releases to put out on our website, so that our teachers and our staff and our families who had evacuated the area could get onto our website and read the press releases to find out what they hadn't heard from the briefing, you know. So, you know, it was hairy, but you do what you got to do. And the best part about it, I have to say, Etta, and you all can probably relate, is after the fact, you know, after everything's settled down, being out in the community and somebody coming up and saying thank you for what you did, you know, and you don't really think it's a big deal, but people really relied upon you for that information, and they were grateful, and that was a good feeling.
I think that's why we all live here, because our community truly appreciates everybody in the community, and that's why a lot of us do what we do, because we're all part of the community. Bruce, other than saving yourself from electrocution at the studio with the floodwaters, what do you remember?
I think the big theme I took away from the hurricanes is that people are more important than stuff. Sure, you know, we suffered a lot of damage, but people are more important. There are things more important than property. And that being said, I found it almost therapeutic to be at work while this was going on, because I felt like I was doing something positive, you know, as opposed to, I felt bad for people who were just stuck in their homes and just having to endure it. But we were very busy at Christian FM working to provide all the information that people needed to know. I do remember my wife and 3 children evacuated over to the Tampa area, and after the first storm, my first chance to drive home, and driving into my neighborhood wondering, what am I going to see when I get, and my house suffered some damage, but nothing like a lot of my neighbors, you know, suffered much worse than we did. So we were blessed in that regard. But yeah, just the unknown was a little scary. But all in all, I was so impressed with the way people came together, neighbors helping neighbors. I met neighbors in my neighborhood that I never knew existed, because we were helping them and they were helping us, you know, and all in all, it was a devastating situation, but it brought so many people together.
And I agree with that. I think it did bring a lot of people together, and again, it's the reason that we live here. My story is pretty simple. Other than everything else that everybody's mentioned here, I was also concerned about, and it leads in right into the next question here, what was my dog doing during all these storms? And I was lucky enough that I had a place to take my dog so that the dog was safe, and Etta had her husband taking the animals all over. But I think it's important, and we get this question a lot, what do I do with my pet if I'm asked to evacuate and I can't take the pet to the shelter? I can tell you that we will, other than service dogs such as dogs for blind people or deaf people, something like that, we just can't let animals into the public shelters for 2 reasons. Number one is that there is a large portion of the population that has allergies to animal fur, whether it be cat, dog, anything like that. And once the animals were to come into the shelter, even though they may be very nice pets, and we have hurricane force winds, and we have somebody having a severe allergy attack because of the animal, we don't have any way to treat them. And that's a real concern. The second reason is I define a pet as a cat or a dog. You may define a pet as a python or a pot-bellied pig or some type of leopard or something like that. And at what point do we come up with the definition that's easily understandable for everyone? And I don't know that we've come to that point yet. But I think mainly because of the health hazards, I don't see us anytime in the near future allowing pets to come into those shelters, because it's just too difficult right now. What I do with my dog is he leaves with a family member of mine out of the area so that I don't have to worry about him. If you do not have that ability, the easiest thing to do is prepare your home as best you can. Make sure that you put food and water up on a table, so if water does come in from a leaky roof or something like that, their food is not contaminated, but yet they can still get to it to eat. And there's a lot of different things that you can do for your pets, but even if they get out of the house, they'll find their way back. They usually do. But I think really one of the things that you can do right now, if you haven't done it and you're going to leave your pet at home, and you probably should do this even if you don't leave your pet at home, have your pet microchipped by your veterinarian. And a microchip is a little thing. It's about the size of a grain of rice. Your veterinarian can inject it in the back of the neck of your dog or your cat or whatever your pet may be. And if your animal gets loose, the pet or the veterinarian or the Humane Society can scan the animal. If they have this microchip, it at least tells them your code number, and they'll know who the dog or cat belongs to, and they can get in touch with you after the storm. Identification for an animal is probably just as important as preparing your home for the animal, so if they do get out, we have a way to track them down. One of the questions that we had come on earlier, and I just haven't had the time to get to it yet, is we have been talking about the insurance, or we really haven't talked too much about the insurance, but the damages that occurred here and insurance situations that are occurring where people may or may not get insurance. And right now, insurance companies are dealing with this in a whole different way, a lot of the topics with recovery. And a lot of them have already settled a lot of their information, but I know a lot of you are still waiting for money. So in turn, it leads to the question, what does FEMA provide us, and how do we register if we have a disaster? And Etta, we have done a lot of work in the county to make sure people know how to register with FEMA, how to get in touch with FEMA, know what FEMA does. But why don't you briefly go over what may or may not be available if we have a presidential declaration from FEMA?
Well, FEMA can help you with temporary housing. That's one thing. And another thing that they can do, if you're underinsured or if you don't have any insurance at all, that they may be able to help you in that way. They can help you with grants that may be available. There are many different programs that are available with FEMA, but the only way that you can gain access to those programs is to pre-register. So after we're declared a disaster area and you see those registration numbers to register with FEMA, you need to register immediately, because once the time has expired to register with FEMA, you will not be available to take advantage of any of those programs.
And we just had a question come through. I'm going to ask you real quick if you could repeat the time for the tax-free week. We just had another question. They may have just tuned in. Tax-free for the hurricane supplies is? Tax-free
for the hurricane supplies is June 1st through June 12th.
Yeah, January 1st.
Yeah, sorry.
We're watching the Rose Bowl or something there.
No,
I think,
June 1st through June 12th.
Okay, and while we're on some of the FEMA questions, it kind of changes a little bit. We have a question here about evacuation routes, and probably both of us can answer this, but the question is, how do we know what evacuation route to use? And I think we're kind of limited on evacuation routes here in Florida. Do you want to address a little bit about evacuation?
Sure, that's an easy one for Indian River County because we're a small county, but one of the best things I think I can tell our community, everyone has a phone book. Look in your phone book, look on the internet, but primarily it's going to be State Road 60 heading west to I-95, which is north and south. If you're evacuating early enough, you can go to the Turnpike, but remember that the Turnpike in that area from State Road 60 to the Turnpike, it's going to flood early and it's going to back up early on, but that's going to be remedied a lot once the construction is completed, but that's still several years down the road.
Patty, you briefly talked about before about the press conferences that went on after the hurricanes, and that was done at certain times. And maybe this is a good time to kind of inform the public of how exactly that went on and what times and things that were going on. Actually, it's going to be kind of you and Bruce together because you were doing a lot of them and Bruce was broadcasting them. So we'll start with you first because I think it's important they understand right now why the power's on, how they're going to get that information.
That's right. Well, if I recall correctly, Nate, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we started those press conferences before the hurricanes,
correct,
right? And then in the aftermath, we did press conferences twice a day at 10 and 4 until you determined that we didn't need to do them anymore. But I think after Gene, we did it. We were every single day, 7 days, 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And it was a host of people. It was FPNL, Comcast, of course, you, Nathan. We had the county spokesperson, the sheriff's office. We had the city of Vero Beach police there. just everybody that was necessary to get all the information out about curfews, about the Barrier Island openings, about what to do with the traffic lights being out, how to handle those intersections. Of course, when is school going to open? Just unbelievable, the topics that we covered. And it was important that we did that because I found in talking to the community afterwards that that was their sole source for getting information, and people really, really appreciated us doing that. And so we did that for continuously after the storm. And Bruce, I know you guys, it was simulcast to you, you did it live, and
we did, and what was interesting is that throughout every day at the radio station, the phone was constantly ringing with people wanting information, and they were getting second and third hand information that wasn't always accurate. They were hearing about roads that were closed that were really open, or they were hearing that there was ice being distributed somewhere where it wasn't, and they were wasting their precious gas going to get ice that wasn't there. So what I thought was great is we would say, hey, every day, 10 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you're going to hear it from the #1 source of information, which is the county officials themselves who are coordinating all of this. So let's just be patient and get it right from the source. And then, it was sort of funny behind the scenes because we felt as broadcasters, since we were on continuously, we felt, boy, we're talking about this an awful lot. But just as we've seen during this program tonight, someone catches just the last piece of information and doesn't hear the whole story, and they want it repeated. So that was our role, to continue to hammer those key pieces of information that people needed to know, and it seemed to work fairly well.
And that service is going to be available again, and along with everything that was mentioned tonight with the press conferences and the radio stations, Etta, we have a computer services division in the county that set up a great website, and I'm assuming that a lot of our information we're talking about tonight is probably on that website, and maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about what's on there.
That's correct. We have a wonderful webmaster. His name is Dave Merlin, and he's done a terrific job in establishing the county's website, and it's www.ircgov.com, and you can find all kinds of information that we've discussed tonight, the evacuation routes, shelter information, supply list, all kinds of information can be found on that website. You can even find Nathan's tropical updates archived as well.
And one of the best things that we ever purchased with grant money, and I think this is important for all of you, especially if you are planning on leaving the area should we be threatened by any hurricane, really for that matter anytime you leave the area. The website has the Tropical Update Program. It has all of the press releases that go on after a hurricane, gives you information on what's open, what's closed. But the good part about that is, in the past, we knew that once you left the county, we lost all contact with you. We weren't able to talk to you anymore, and you didn't know what was open, what was closed, what was working, what was not. And now that the website gives us that ability, so if you leave town, if you go anywhere from Orlando, if you go to Paris, France, all you have to do is go into a local library, log on to our website, and you'll be able to get that information as if you were here. And I can't tell you how many times we had people call us thanking us for that website, and it's doing exactly what we wanted it to do. It's giving you the information on what may or may not occur.
Nathan, I think one of the most useful tools was Barrier Island residents who would call, and they were very concerned about their homes over on the beach side. And early on during the damage assessment, you had sent out a crew to take some beach video, and that was posted on the website. And we would tell the beachside residents who were calling from out of state, oftentimes they were calling from their residents up north, and we would tell them about the tape that was posted on the website, and they would go on there and view the website and then call us back, very impressed that they were able to view the damages that were on the website, and either they would see their homes and either damaged or not, but they found it very beneficial to see what the damages were. And time again we heard compliments about how good the video was and how relieved they were that they could see what happened to their communities.
And that's exactly what we want to do, is be able to pass that information on. And actually, these comments lead into the next question. We must be stimulating the minds out there because they're asking questions as we come up with these topics. I should once more give you the number for the radio listeners. It's 800-780-3692 if you have any questions for us tonight. The next question deals with why do we close the barrier island when there's a hurricane? And I think we all dealt with this question in one form or another because people were concerned they couldn't get on the barrier island. No one likes to hear that they can't go to their home. They can't see their home. And the barrier island is a unique place because it has a phenomenon called storm surge. Storm surge is the abnormal raising of the tide because of an approaching hurricane. Now, the tide will increase based on the strength of the hurricane. The stronger the hurricane, the higher the tide. In both hurricanes, we had water from the Atlantic Ocean break the dunes and go over towards A1A and some of the other places on the barrier island. But actually, the worst flooding occurred from the Indian River, the water being poured into the Indian River from the two inlets, Fort Pierce and Sebastian Inlet, and that brought the water in from the other side of the barrier island, and we had two areas of flooding. The reason that we don't open the barrier island right away is because we have to get the water out. The water has to have time to go down a little bit so that you can travel. I can tell you after both hurricanes, there was no way anybody was going to be driving over the bridges because once you got across the bridge, the water was about 4 foot deep at the base of the bridge. I know a lot of people would say, well, we can get through that, but you just didn't realize the flooding that was occurring there. We have a lot of things to do immediately after the hurricanes, and one thing that we don't want to have to do is go and rescue people because they underestimated the floodwaters on the barrier island. I know it's inconvenient, but it's something that has to be done, and we review that on a case-by-case basis. If you remember, during Hurricane Aaron and during Hurricane Irene, and actually during when we were brushed by Hurricane Floyd, we never closed the barrier island. The barrier island was reopened again once the storms moved out of the way with no delay. And that may happen again. But with the last two hurricanes, we couldn't do that because there were real threats there. And we'll evaluate each storm on a case-by-case basis. Believe me, we do everything to expedite opening that, but we have to make sure you're going to be safe first. Etta, when we were talking about supplies, I think one of the things that we have been telling people for years, but I think they really felt the hardship this time, was medications. And the pharmacies were closed because the electricity wasn't on. And go ahead and explain what we recommend for medications as part of, and in general, the supply kit.
That's right. Make sure that you have your prescription medications as part of your disaster supply kit. And we recommend to have at least a 2-week supply. Now, if you remember back following Hurricanes Francis and Jean, there were some pharmacies that were closed for at least a week, sometimes 2, and if you lived over on the barrier island, the CVS that was formerly Eckerd's was closed for several months because of severe damage. So you need to be prepared for that and make sure that you have several weeks worth of medications so that it doesn't leave you in dire straits. So make sure that that's part of your disaster supply kit and part of your disaster plan.
Okay, and I think that's a real good point because if you don't have medications, it's a crisis situation. Mm-hmm. We just had another question come in, and it's magic. We come up with a topic, and we're getting the question. This is a good thing. A question came up where a person lives in a condominium complex or a property managed area on the barrier island, and their property association does not allow them to put up shutters unless a storm is imminent. That's one topic. The other one is they want to know if there's an ID for people to get over to the barrier islands so that they can check their properties. And I think we covered the reason why we don't let people over there immediately afterwards. And it doesn't matter if they're going over there to check the property or not. If they can't get over there because of the flooding waters, they don't need to be over there. But the property owners associations, not only for the barrier island, but for many areas in this county, have rules about their hurricane shutters. It is something of a decision of each property owners association as to how they're going to do that. But I can tell you that it is not legal to not allow any type of hurricane shutter. The property owners association have to allow some type of shuttering for windows at some point. Now they can dictate the time you can put them up, And they can also dictate the type of shutter you're going to use, but they cannot just simply have a blanket, we're never going to have window protection, you can never put it up. If you have a property owners association that is stating that, you need to talk to that property owners association and let them know that that's just not a legal interpretation of what they're looking at. They have to let you put window protection up at least well before a storm so that you have plenty of time to get it up. And Bruce, I know that when you all have your call-in shows, a lot of times there's questions about what kind of shutters we should use and that, and we've answered those questions before. But I think when they start the call-in show that we did when the winds were up to 60, 70 miles an hour, they were calling, I think, for two reasons. Number one, they may have had a question. But did you get the feeling they were calling because they just wanted to know somebody was there?
Oh, for sure.
And we were providing the information. But I know after that, your station provided a lot of information to those people well into the night. And tonight we want people to know that they'll be able to continue to do that with your station.
Yeah, we talked to a lot of folks, especially some elderly folks who are home alone, riding out the storm, not knowing whether their roof was going to make it through the storm. And we took a lot of calls from folks who just needed another friendly voice out there to reassure them that we're all going through this together and that we were going to get through this. And boy, when you came into the studios to do those call-in shows, the phones just lit up because folks wanted to hear your thoughts on a lot of these issues. And there were some really good questions, and it's amazing. Every year we get some really good questions like we are tonight, just issues that we haven't really maybe thought of. And I know everything we've learned from last season we'll incorporate into this year. One thing I was talking to you about before the show, Nathan, maybe you can address this, is during the time of hurricane warning and mandatory evacuations were issued by Indian River County, we were talking about folks that live on the barrier island, folks that live east of US 1 were asked to evacuate, folks living in mobile homes were asked to evacuate. Are we going to have a whole new set of circumstances this year with folks who have not seen the repairs done from the previous season?
And that's a great question, and Ed and I have been discussing this, that we may actually be looking at a situation where we may have to open up shelters for a tropical storm simply because some of the structures may not be ready for 10 inches of rain if we were to receive that. Any other year, it's a matter of, okay, it's a rainy day, it's a bad day, and we'll just write off this day and wait for tomorrow. That's not the case anymore with these big rain events, and we're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And we won't keep it secret. We'll definitely let everybody know. But Ed is included in a lot of the CEMP plans that we could easily open up these shelters for anything that we may need to do. And, of course, Patty and the school district, they are well aware that we may do that. And a lot of times, you know, that's going to impact the schools. But, again, we get back to the situation of the public. We have to protect the public. And if these things are going to happen, school is not going to be in session anyways.
That's right. And, you know, Nathan, the school district looks at it as our duty and our responsibility to our community to open up those shelters and make sure that our residents are safe. So, you know, we do what we have to do.
We have a great question here that I was going to address later on, but I'm glad it came up now because I'm happy to say that we've already come up with a solution to this issue. And the question is, will the same distribution centers for emergency supplies be used if we get hit again? Etta, we've changed one of those, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
We want to go ahead and talk about it?
We use the North County Aquatic Center as a distribution center in the north area, and that worked out fine with the exception of the traffic situation because it was a two-lane highway. But we've gotten together and we've readdressed that issue, and we've designated the Sebastian Elementary School as a replacement for the North County Aquatic Center because it's a four-lane highway and the traffic will be much better managed, and we thought that that area would work out much better.
And I definitely think that'll help with the traffic situation. We have a question here that I guess is my question. You guys are off the hook now. But it's a question relating to the wind force of a hurricane or tropical storm being strong at the surface but weaker aloft, and thunderstorms tend to be the opposite. And I have to tell you that the winds at the surface are actually weaker in a hurricane than they are, say, 5,000 feet up. The surface winds, and that's the winds when we're talking about the hurricane forecast, when we say maximum sustained winds of 100 miles per hour, That is the winds that we are estimating at the surface, right where we live. But after a study during Hurricane Andrew, we noticed that the winds were stronger in some of the buildings that were maybe 20 stories high in Miami. A significant difference where they would be 20 or 30 miles an hour stronger as you got above the 20th floor or something in those buildings. And that was significant because a lot of times, as the questioner is asking here, we thought that the winds would stay somewhat the same. And then as we got into 1995 and 96 with the hurricanes and the new drop sound that the Hurricane Center is using, we definitely did discover that the winds get stronger the higher you go up. And what may be a 100-mile-an-hour wind on the surface goes to 160 miles an hour at flight level for the airplanes that go in. So the winds are getting stronger as they go up, but we are concerned really with the surface winds. But if for our area, that's not a situation. Places like Miami, Houston, Texas, New Orleans, the big cities that have a lot of high-rise buildings, these are places that have to take this into consideration. If it's a 75-mile-an-hour storm on the first floor and it's a 100-mile-an-hour storm on the 30th floor, they need to make some special preparation because along with damage to that building will be a lot of glass moving around. As far as the afternoon thunderstorms are caused by a completely different situation during the summertime called the sea breeze effect. And that's cool air from the ocean moves across the warming air of the peninsula, and then we get the evaporation of the air, it rises to the atmosphere, and then we get the cooling, and then we get the big thunderstorms in the afternoon. Now the sea breeze effect is real easy. It happens every day when the temperature's over 90 degrees. If we have a southeast wind, that's winds coming from the southeast, you'll see the big thunderstorms in the central part of Florida and the west coast of Florida. If the winds are coming from the southwest or south, then these storms develop again in central Florida, but they intensify over the east coast of Florida. So the sea breeze, depending on which way it's moving, will depend on the intensity of the storms. But that's why they intensify so quickly, because they have a very good moisture source and the water's evaporating. So I hope that answered your question as far as the difference between the storms and the winds itself, because we don't ever want you to think the winds are getting weaker as you go higher in the altitudes. It's actually getting stronger. Patty, when we were talking about the school system and how the schools, they decide to open up again, I don't think that we had the situation before where we couldn't open all the schools at the same time. I know some of the other counties had that situation where they couldn't open up the other schools. And I know our school system is planned for that we may have to do double sessions or something like that. With the new schools coming on, is that, because they're going to be built to the stronger codes, is that going to help out with that situation, maybe eliminating that possibility where some of the schools, we may have to not open them up for students afterwards?
Well, we certainly hope it will help the situation, Nathan. You know, last year we were thinking after the second hurricane that there was a very strong possibility that we might have to open some schools and not open others because of the lack of power. And you know, it was right up to the 11th hour that we were waiting for power to be restored. We had plans to open schools on Monday, and I think it was late Sunday evening when we knew we had that last school powered up and ready to go. So, you know, we are building new schools. Our school district and this county in general is growing tremendously by leaps and bounds, and you know, hopefully that will alleviate any possibility of us, you know, having to do double sessions or anything in the future. As I said, you know, Superintendent Marr and his staff work closely with all the county agencies to get the schools open just as quick as we can, and you know, making sure that they're safe for our students and our staff.
And you all do a fine job with that for sure, and we definitely appreciate that. Etta, questions coming in, and I guess this again could go to either one of us. But I couldn't get gasoline because of the curfew on my work schedule. Why don't we have specific places open after curfew to sell gasoline where drivers could get a receipt and show that they just went to buy gasoline? And I think this is an appropriate time to talk about why those curfews are out there and the whole meaning behind the curfew.
Well, they need to plan accordingly. There's a curfew for a reason, and the reason for the curfew is that there are down or not operating traffic signals, and it's for your safety. Law enforcement meets every day, and they decide that there's a curfew, and that curfew has been issued for a reason, and if you know you're going to need gas, you need to do it during non-curfew hours, and there are no exceptions. And law enforcement is meeting now to come up with a policy on people who do work shift work, and during evening hours, employees such as hospital workers, like very essential workers such as government employees and, as I said, hospital workers and media employees. And they're working on those issues now, so there may be some exceptions in the future. And we'll see if some policies will change. But curfews are issued for very specific reasons, and most of those reasons are for their safety.
And we were talking about this earlier in a couple meetings ago, where I've lived here 31 years. I go up and down US 1 every day from Sebastian to Vero Beach and back to Sebastian. After the hurricanes, I was driving through intersections that I didn't even recognize that I should have been stopping. And if we have National Guard, law enforcement, any of those groups at that intersection, they become potential targets for people that are out there when the power's out. And we don't want that to happen. And of course, nobody should be out there at that point. I should let you know, and Etta mentioned it, we are looking at the essential services. We hope to have a policy developed on that soon so that we can take care of that. But the curfews is something that is decided by the county administrator and the law enforcement agencies on a daily basis. They meet, they talk about what's the situation with power, what's the safety situation, and everything is based on the safety of the first responders when those curfew hours are decided. It's not based for convenience, it's based strictly for safety of the workers. And usually it kind of coincides with the restoration of power. But please don't think that the curfew's there just because it's easy for us to keep people off the street. The curfew is there for safety of the first responders so that they're not out there in the middle of the street repairing something and you can't see them because it's just too dark.
I'd like to add something else, too. That if you do some research on the internet, you can look up Hurricane Charlie and see that they had a number of deaths related to vehicle accidents. And that's because early on during the recovery of that hurricane, they did not have an alcohol ban, they did not have curfews, and they had a number of alcohol-related deaths and traffic accidents. And I can proudly say that Indian River County lost no people due to those reasons. And I'd like to see it continued, that we continue with the alcohol ban, we continue with the curfews to keep our people safe.
And I want to remind the radio listeners now that the number to call again is 800-780-3692, or you can email a question at storm@christianfn.com, and you can email those questions. We have a lot of questions coming through about insurance, and we're going to address that in just a couple minutes. One of the questions that's coming through right now is, I'll kind of paraphrase it here. Basically, they are looking for information on when they can tell caregivers to provide help and check on their clients and residents after a hurricane. And Etta, I think really that's going to be no different than a lot of the other people. You know, when the recovery starts, that's when we start checking on our public.
That's right. And then again, that's going to come to the essential services too, because law enforcement, when they're looking into allowing people back on the streets during curfew times, they're going to look into, as I said, allowing hospital employees and other healthcare facility type workers, because otherwise they're going to have to do it during non-curfew hours.
And Indian River County continues to have a large population of people that have caregivers at home, or they have different medical problems. And Ed has mentioned it before, the special needs shelter. Maybe we need to just go over the special needs shelter again real quick for people that weren't listening earlier, because it's such a vital, important part, not only for Indian River County, but every county in the state of Florida as far as pre-registration.
That's right, Nathan. I'm glad you brought that up, because I'd be happy to remind our residents of the special needs shelter. The special needs shelter is located at the Sebastian River High School. That's for people who need help with their day-to-day living due to medical conditions. You do have to meet certain medical criteria, and that criteria is everyone's applications are reviewed by a healthcare professional, and you do have to pre-register. You can call our office for an application. That number is 567-8000, extension 1444. You can talk to Bonnie, and she'll be happy to discuss that with you. And we do offer transportation to the special needs shelter, or you can transport yourself. And if you're someone who needs transportation to a regular shelter, we can arrange that for you also. But you do need to pre-register by calling the same number. Again, that number is 567-8000, extension 1444.
And maybe you can go over some of the professionals that are at the special needs shelter to help them out with their care.
Yes, we have paramedics, we have firefighters, nurses, doctors, we have professionals from the health department. Who else do we have out there?
School district personnel.
School district personnel, absolutely,
Administrators.
absolutely.
I have to,
True.
if you don't mind, I have to just say that, you know, our principals and our administrators really performed an outstanding job at those shelters.
That's right.
They managed
Everyone
them.
works very hard
You know, our
out there.
maintenance workers kept the generators going. You know, I heard stories of people running out in the height of the
Absolutely.
storm, and especially at the special needs shelter, and you know, getting generators back up and going so that they would have the things that they need to carry on there. And you know, our food service personnel, I heard
Absolutely.
an astounding figure. I think it was Frank Mullins and his crew provided 75,000 meals during
Wow.
both of those storms. And our transportation, Cookie Geyer and her folks, you know, running people back and forth to the shelters and stuff. So I just had to,
Yes, I'm glad
I had
you
to
did
say
that.
because we had so many people that
Great.
worked so hard and devoted so much time and effort to those shelters.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of the public doesn't realize the agencies involved in not only the special needs,
Yeah.
but the regular shelter. We have the school district with their principals and their staff. The American Red Cross with their volunteers are there to register the victims. We have the food service within the school that's providing the food, getting everything going. We have FPL and the City of Vero power companies getting ready to make sure that that power goes back on as soon as possible, because those schools are shelter. There's just a lot of effort that goes into those shelters, and we definitely appreciate everything that all those groups do, because again, it's just another effort, as Bruce mentioned before, another way where the community's working together. Let me talk a little bit about insurance. I'm receiving a lot of questions specific to this insurance company told me this insurance company told me that. Every insurance company has had different responses to different claims this year as far as your specific situation. Was your home damaged to where it needs to be replaced? Can we just replace things? You feel that they've totally underestimated the damage to your home? We've heard all of these stories. I have to tell you that the insurance companies, most of them have done pretty well. Most of them have at least provided the essential monies to get things started. But what I've heard more than anything else is what we call appraised value versus replacement value. And I think we should probably explain that just a little bit. Remember, I am not your insurance agent. Please do not call me, but I'm going to explain it the best I can, and then you can confirm this with your insurance agent tomorrow. The appraised value of your damage to your home, let's say you had a television worth $500, and it was worth $500 when you bought it. You've had it for 3 or 4 years or however long. Now your insurance company tells you that we are going to give you $100 for that television. That's because that is the appraised value of your television at that time. But you have replacement coverage on your insurance. So what that means is the insurance company is giving you $100, and then when you replace the television, they will give you the other $400 for the replacement of that television. Now, every insurance company handles that differently. Some of them will pay you up front for that. Some of them will pay you and reimburse you. You need to check with your specific agent to know exactly what your policy says. But I think for insurance purposes, the biggest surprise that everybody had last year is, I never heard of this 2% deductible. That was the question that came up. Most people have looked at their policies and they simply said $500 deductible for fire, for theft, that kind of thing. And there's a little clause on the policies that say 2%, 3%, 5% deductible for wind damage. And that's wind damage associated with the hurricanes. And unfortunately, I think all of us learned the hard way of those deductibles, not only but for one, but for 2 storms. Luckily, the state stepped in and we only had to pay one deductible for the whole entire hurricane season. But again, this is really important to talk to your insurance agents now. I don't want to give any insurance information out tonight because, as I said, there's over 400 insurance companies that work in the state of Florida, and everyone has a different policy as to how they do things. You need to talk with your individual agent and know a couple things. Know what your deductible is, know what is covered if we have another hurricane, and most importantly, know do you need flood insurance or not. Flood insurance covers you for damage if the only source of damage to your home was from rising water. A lot of people had water damage, especially on the barrier island, that was caused from rising water, but was not caused from the wind. And if you did not have flood insurance, you basically had no insurance coverage whatsoever. You need to know what your threats are, evaluate the possible threats to your property, go to your insurance company and make sure that you have the appropriate insurance, because as most of you know, FEMA will be here to help you out, but FEMA is not a timely agency when it comes to trying to get immediate money. Your insurance company will respond a lot faster with financial aid than FEMA, so make sure that you have that coverage. Make sure that you're financially secure, at least right after the hurricane, because that's what you're going to be concerned about more than anything else. And we also want to remind you to make sure that your automobile insurance is covered. There was a lot of surprises with automobile insurance when it came time for, well, a tree fell on my car. Well, where was the tree? And who owned the tree? And that type of thing. These are questions that you need answers to, but now is the time to get answers from your insurance agent, because at the heat of the moment, so many people are trying to get information, it becomes very, very difficult for you to get through on those phone numbers and get that information. And make sure that you know how to access your money. I mean, we talk about a lot of things for recovery and supplies, but money is very important, because what happened? Etta will tell you what happened. How many calls did we say? I can't get money because my ATM won't work because the power's not on. Make sure that you have cash, because you're going to have to use cash to purchase a lot of things. Etta, as we're getting towards the end of the program here, I want to make sure that we've covered topics that are important to you, and to Patty, to Bruce, to myself. What are issues that we haven't covered tonight that we need to get out to our public right now?
Well, there's one thing I wanted to add, and then as people drive along during the day and it kind of becomes remote, they go to work, they go to school, and they don't really pay attention to what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. As you know, I attended the Governor's Hurricane Conference last week, and I did a workshop on Hurricane Jeanne, and the topic was the good, the bad, the ugly, and I decided that the ugly part would be Hurricane Jeanne, the scars of recovery and what's going on now. So rather than going remotely down the road and not paying attention to my surroundings, I took my camera out and I paid particular attention to the damages that are still out there. And I photographed the damages that are still there. And you'd be amazed if you really took your time and looked at everything, that this community is still hurting. We still have scars. Look around. Your neighbors are hurting. We're right on the heels of the 2005 hurricane season, and we need to be ready for that. Look at your neighbors. We still have blue tarps out there. We still have roofs that are not repaired. We still have commercial structures and businesses that are not in business any longer. Look on the beach side. We have hotels that are no longer in business, and we depend on those rooms for tourism, and they're no longer in business. We have restaurants that are closed. So our community is not back in order. So there are a lot of things that we're still hurting. And the 2005 hurricane season is right here, and we need to start recovering a little better than we have been.
Absolutely. I want to go through it. Before I go to you, Patty, you got a reprieve here for a minute.
Thanks,
There's one
Nate.
other thing I want
One other thing, okay, go ahead.
One other thing. If anyone still has outstanding insurance issues out there, remember that our insurance commissioner, Tom Gallagher, is there to help you. And I know personally that I've had to make several phone calls out there to 1-800-22-STORM, S-T-O-R-M. And their office has helped tremendously, and that's what they're there for. If you're still having problems with your insurance company, call them. That's what they're there for.
And that number's still up and operational.
As far as I know, it is.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it is. So please use that. A question came through asking about, they heard that the city or the county, one, was going to be issuing passes that would make the checkpoints easier if you lived on the barrier island. And there was some discussion about this, and what we found was that even if we had passes or IDs, it wouldn't speed up the process at all, because we would still have to check in every individual car that was going across the bridge. And we had to do that anyway for proof of ID, so really it wouldn't expedite anything. What we are giving consideration to this time, and again, every storm is going to be different, and I don't want you to think that any of this is set in policy, but we're considering that we may just open the barrier island to everyone rather than segmenting it from residents to contractors to insurance people, because what we found was you, the resident, went back to the barrier island, you saw that there was damage to your home, and you needed people to come over to help you fix it, but there wasn't that ability. So we're going to be going through all that, but always remember the decisions made for letting people over deal with public safety, and that is the sole issue that we're dealing with, and all of your public safety agencies meet to discuss this, and that'll continue. Also, we received a question from Rock Ridge. A person has asked a question about they use bags of mulch to try and keep the water out, and was wondering if sandbags would do a better job of keeping the water outside of their house if they put sandbags around the house. Sandbags are probably the best thing that you can use for trying to keep water out. But the sandbags have to be placed in such a manner that you don't have any areas that leak. But sand and the bags tend to conform to each other. Mulch is not doing it. It's not a very good absorbent when it comes to the kind of water you're going to be looking at. So I would definitely recommend, if you're having a problem with that water, sandbags would definitely be something that can work. And Etta, we received a question here about they heard there was a lot of tornado damage throughout the county, and I think you and I went to a number of conferences over the last 10 years or so, and 50 or 60 tornadoes easily in every hurricane when they come through. And whether it's the hurricane or the tornadoes, I don't think it really makes any difference in the damage. We're still seeing a lot of damage.
That's right.
Patty, what did we forget about the school district? What does our residents need to know?
Well, I just want them to know that, like you both said about the county website, the school district was able to maintain our website as well throughout both storms last year, and we intend to, well, we hopefully will be able to do that if we have, you know, a hurricane this year. And for folks, families who have evacuated the state, evacuated the area, that is really and truly the best tool to find out, you know, when your kids need to be back in school, or if you're a teacher or a school district employee, when you need to be back to work, because those times, you know, they fluctuated on a day-to-day basis, and that was the best tool to get the information out there besides the press conferences. So, you know, don't forget the website. We'll be putting information out on our telephone line, the main school district telephone line, 564-3000. You know, if schools should close due to a hurricane and when they will reopen. And the last thing I want to say is, you know, we talk about the anxiety in the community, Nate. You know, as adults, we're sitting here talking about it, but, you know, our kids, our students, our children, you know, they're probably getting a little anxious too when they hear us talking about it, and they know, the older kids, they know that hurricane season is approaching, and you know, we have folks in our school who are trained to help our kids, our students, through these situations. So, you know, as we're talking as adults, we need to remember that our children are listening, and they are aware that hurricane season is approaching again, and just be attuned to that and try and help them deal with any anxieties that they may have as well. And if you're a parent of a student who may be having trouble in school, you know, or something like that, you know, be sure and talk to your school's principal and go, you know, get them some help if they need it, because it is a very anxious time for a lot of folks.
And it's interesting that you of course, you mentioned the children and what they may be going through. And this year is probably the first year where we've had requests to come and speak to the senior class as their graduations are occurring, or coming to their senior party or band graduations. And I think because the message is there, they understand that this is hurricane season, and now they're asking questions, and that's a good thing, because while you all are educating them on everything else that's going on in life, everyone has to educate them on the hurricane situation because they're going to have to be prepared.
That's
If
right.
Mrs. Wilson from Beachland Elementary School is listening.
Uh-oh.
My children, when they called from out of state when they evacuated, didn't ask how I was doing, but they asked if Beachland Elementary School survived.
Oh, wow.
And that-
So
that's
it's
a
very
normal question.
important to
Yeah.
the
It's a normal
children.
question.
Sure.
No question about
That's
that.
right.
That's right.
Bruce, what do you have for us?
I just remember that during the height of the storm and the aftermath of it, a lot of rumor and gossip around the community. I would recommend that you just, consider the source of the information that you're getting. Listen to the government officials. They're the ones making the decisions. I think we all had those moments in the height of the storm where we thought, gee, I wish I would have thought of this about 6 months ago. And I think now is the time when we can think about those things. What should we have done last year that we didn't do that we need to all do with our families and with our workplaces, with our schools, whatever, and do those. And also you realize that a boombox takes 8 D-cell batteries, so you can never have too many batteries. And
Get those batteries early.
and you can never have
That's
you can never
right.
have too many portable radios too, because that's another thing I think a lot of folks forget about is when the power goes out and you have no cable, you have no TV. Battery operated radios are the source of information, so I would really highly recommend that everyone have a battery operated radio this year.
Absolutely. We've been trying to get people to buy the FM radios because they're an inexpensive way. $5 you can have a radio. Well, now it's my turn, and you get to listen to me talk for a while. So if you're tired of hearing me talk, now's the time where you should turn the TV off. But I want to go over a couple things that we've talked about tonight and some of the things that you need to be going to the store or doing right now, doing it in the next couple of days. We've talked about the AM, FM radio. We've talked about cable television. We've talked about a lot of communication methods. But we've centered that communication on hurricanes. Day to day, we have different things that may threaten our county, such as terrorism. We may have severe weather, thunderstorms, tornadoes. Every resident should have what we call a NOAA weather radio in their home. NOAA stands for the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. It's the people that run the Weather Service. And you can go to any of your electronic stores, and they will have these radios on hand. They vary in price from maybe $25 to $50, depending on what brand you have. But these little radios, they sit on your table and for 99.5% of the time do absolutely nothing. But when there's an emergency, such as a hurricane, an evacuation, a tornado, an alarm goes off in these radios, and immediately there's a message on that radio telling you what the emergency is and the protective action that's recommended for you to do. These radios can be alerted at night, they can be alerted while you're sound asleep, and at least you know there's a potential threat out there and what you need to do to prepare yourself. I encourage everyone to make sure that you have one of these NOAA weather radios. Make sure you have it at your home, make sure you have it at your business, because while we have some time with hurricanes, we don't have time with a lot of other natural events that may occur, and that's the best way to get the information out to you. And I should tell you that that alarm will definitely wake you up because it wakes me up every time that it goes off in the middle of the night. Make sure that it's battery operated, it has that alarm feature, and they're very easy to use, and we recommend no matter where you live that you use that weather radio. Now, you've heard us talk a lot tonight about the different things that you need to do to prepare for hurricane season and what we're going to be looking at as far as our satellite imagery. But you still haven't heard the question that you want to hear. Are we going to be hit by any hurricanes? And we've already said that there's no way that we can predict that. But you have to assume that we will probably be impacted by some type of tropical system and prepare for that. Now, if it's been like the other 200 years or so, we'll probably do okay this year and we won't have any problems, but you will be prepared. But if we have a repeat of a year like 1995 when we had Hurricane Aaron, 1999 when we had Hurricane Irene, those years we had hurricane activity, but we weren't paralyzed as a community. We were able to recover from that fine. We had some days of inconvenience with the power out, but that was it. But then in 2004, when we had the paralyzing storms, the Francis and the Jean, those are the ones that we still have to do our best to prepare for, but there may not be some things that we can prepare for. I don't know that we can adequately prepare for a storm of 120 or 30 miles an hour and tell you that your roof won't be damaged. There's going to be some damage, but now we've learned, have blue tarps on hand. I can tell you we've been doing this for 16 years. We've never once mentioned having a blue tarp in your supply kit. Now we tell that to everyone to make sure that you have a blue tarp in your supply kit to at least keep the rain out. We've learned a lot through our personal experiences, and as I said in the beginning of the program, our personal experiences tend to be the best educator when it comes to disasters and that type of thing. We learned a lot after the terrorist events in 2001. We learned a lot here after the hurricanes in the 1990s. But I don't think that any of us really expected what occurred in 2004. Even though we've been predicting that that was possible, I don't think we expected to see what actually occurred. Hopefully that's not going to happen this year. When the steering currents develop, we're definitely going to let you know what we're looking at. But I can't emphasize enough, now is the time to prepare. Now, what is our schedule for Tropical Update program and what we're going to be doing here on the cable channel? We are going to be starting our Tropical Update program about the first week in July. Now, we typically do not do the Tropical Update program in June, even though hurricane season starts June 1st, because there's not a lot of activity in June, and usually the activity is limited to either the western Gulf of Mexico or the western Caribbean Sea, and we don't want to bore you with the program if there's nothing really to tell you night after night after night, because the last thing that we want you to do is get bored with the program and you don't watch it. So we usually start that in July, but if anything develops in the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean, we will come on immediately and start the broadcast at that time, because the last thing that we want is a tropical system. It develops, it starts moving, and you don't have the correct information. We will be providing you that information as we've done in the past. We'll let you know if there is a threat, and we'll let you know if there's not a threat. But we have no reason to lie to you, I guess is the best way to tell you. We have no reason to do that. We would not lie to you. We will give you the best information that we have. And keep in mind that our information comes right from the scientists at the National Hurricane Center. It is not something that we do on a projection. We get all of our scientific information from the same sources. I guess the last thing that I want to bring to you tonight is very simply, you know the rule with my tie. And the tie is very simple. If I'm not wearing a tie, something bad is getting ready to happen. So if you see me on television and I'm wearing a tie, you can turn it off. You don't have to watch me. You don't have to worry about anything. You'll probably get tired of listening to me anyway. But if I'm not wearing a tie and you see me on television, you need to turn the volume up and listen to everything that emergency management is telling you to do to protect yourself from whatever the threat may be. As we close tonight, I want to thank the students from the Vero Beach High School television production class who are behind the cameras here tonight that have produced this program, that are operating everything that you see. They are here because they are just as dedicated to making sure their community is prepared as much as we are here and as much as they are. They've got tips tonight and have already started doing things at their home, trying to get their homes better prepared. And I would be in error if I didn't recognize Craig Jerome, who is the actual instructor for this class and is the producer and is the man that's always behind the camera, behind the shadows, who is making all of this work and all of this operate. Through the hurricanes, through the Tropical Update programs, Craig is the one that makes this possible, and I don't know what we would do without him. And of course, Patty, to the school district, the Indian River County School Board, and everybody that allows us to use the facility here, we thank them for that, along with the community, everybody here in the community who supports what we do. We feel that emergency management has a very good reputation in our community now, and we feel that you have the trust, or we have the trust from our community to give you information, and you will act appropriately with that information, and we will do nothing to violate that trust that you have entrusted to us. We will definitely give you that information should we be threatened by any type of disaster situation. So we've been on TV enough. We've been talking enough. They're tired of hearing me. You're probably not tired of hearing them. But I know that everybody has probably heard enough about hurricanes tonight. If you are still looking for information, if we didn't answer your question tonight, you can call me. You can call Ed at any time at 567-8000, extension 444. Ed and I are there in the office every day, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. You can go to the county's website. You can do a lot of different things to get the information, but get the information that you need. Make sure that you have the information you need for whatever your situation is, so that if we are threatened, you have that. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. Have a great weekend here in Indian River County, and here's for a very quiet hurricane season.